For more than 2,000 years, one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations developed along the great rivers of East Asia. This civilization's story begins near the fertile banks of the Yellow River, where communities transformed the challenges of their environment into the foundations of a complex society. From the traditionally recorded Xia Dynasty, emerging around 2070 BCE, through successive eras defined by conflict, consolidation, and cultural innovation. The course of ancient China's history unfolds until the fall of the Han Dynasty into 20 CE. This vast time span witnessed the gradual emergence of centralized kingship, the invention of a written language, the construction of expansive empires, and the development of political and philosophical ideas that would resonate far beyond the region's borders. The dynasties of this period, Jia, Shang, Zhou, Qin, and Han, each contributed distinct elements to the tapestry of Chinese civilization, shaping governance structures, social organization, technology, and culture. Together, they formed a continuous but evolving legacy that provides critical insight into the origins of imperial China. The geographical setting of these dynasties played a defining role. The Yellow River, often called the cradle of Chinese civilization, offered fertile soil and water resources that supported early agriculture. Yet this river was also a source of destruction through frequent flooding, which necessitated cooperative efforts for flood control and irrigation. These efforts promoted the development of centralized authority and complex social structures. Alongside the Yellow River, the Yangtze River basin also supported flourishing settlements and would later become an important region of Chinese civilization. Natural features such as mountains, deserts, and river systems influenced the expansion of political territories, trade routes, and military campaigns, delineating boundaries and facilitating interactions between various peoples. The narrative of ancient China's dynasties traditionally begins with the Xia Dynasty, described in early Chinese historical texts as the first hereditary monarchy. Central to this narrative is Yu the Great, credited with controlling the devastating floods of the Yellow River through extensive engineering projects. These flood control efforts imply the presence of an organized state capable of mobilizing labor and resources at a scale previously unseen among Neolithic communities. However, while the Xia dynasty is firmly established in tradition, archaeological evidence directly linking it to the Erlitou culture, the archaeological complex dating to roughly the same period, remain as inconclusive. Excavations at Erlitou reveal urban settlements with complex layouts, sophisticated bronze tools, and indications of social hierarchy. Yet no contemporaneous written records confirm a direct connection. As a result, scholars debate whether the Erlitou culture corresponds to the Xia dynasty or represents a precursor to later state formations. This period, regardless of definitive historical labels, marks a transition from agricultural villages to increasingly complex societies with centralized governance. Following this formative period, the Shang Dynasty emerges as the earliest Chinese dynasty confirmed through both archaeological and written evidence. Centered in the Yellow River Valley, the Shang controlled a substantial territory, with its capital at Anying serving as the political, religious, and economic hub. One of the most significant archaeological discoveries from the Shang period consists of oracle bones, animal bones, and turtle shells inscribed with the earliest known examples of Chinese writing. These inscriptions were used in divination rituals, providing a unique record of Shang political decisions, religious beliefs, and social affairs. The kings of Shang maintained authority through elaborate ceremonies that connected political power with ancestral worship and divine sanction. The production of bronze vessels and weapons during this time demonstrates advanced metallurgy and organized economic activity. Shang society was characterized by a strict hierarchy, with the king supported by nobles, warriors, artisans, and farmers. Frequent military campaigns expanded or defended Shang territories. The dynasty's establishment of writing, religious institutions, and state governance represents a pivotal step in the evolution of Chinese civilization. The Zhou Dynasty succeeded the Shang following a military conquest around 1046 year BC, introducing new political concepts that would define Chinese statecraft for centuries. Among these, the mandate of heaven stands out as a central doctrine. It proposed that rulers govern with the approval of heaven, conditional on their ability to maintain order and justice. If rulers failed in these duties, they could lose this divine approval, thereby legitimizing rebellion and dynastic change. The Zhou dynasty is traditionally divided into two phases. During the Western Zhou period, the dynasty maintained relative cohesion through a feudal system, whereby regional lords were granted land and authority in exchange for allegiance and military support. However, by the Eastern Zhou period, central authority weakened, and political fragmentation led to a landscape of competing states. The Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods, which span much of the Eastern Zhou era, were marked by intense conflict as rival states sought to dominate the region. Despite this political instability, the period is notable for a flourishing of intellectual activity. Philosophers such as Confucius, Laozi, and Han Dynasty developed contrasting schools of thought that addressed governance, ethics, and social order. These philosophies would leave a lasting imprint on Chinese culture and government. The chaos of the Warring States period concluded when the state of Qin, located in western China, achieved unification of the region in 221 year BC. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, enacted wide-ranging reforms to consolidate control. These included standardizing the written script, weights and measures, currency, and legal codes across the newly unified empire. Qin's administration was highly centralized, based on legalist principles that emphasized strict laws and state control over society. Massive infrastructure projects were undertaken, such as the initial construction of the Great Wall, intended to defend against incursions from northern nomadic tribes. Despite these achievements, Qin's regime was marked by authoritarianism and harsh punishments, which bred widespread discontent. Following the death of Qin Shi Huang, rebellions erupted, leading to the dynasty's collapse within a decade and a half. Nonetheless, the Qin dynasty set the political and administrative model for subsequent Chinese empires. The Han Dynasty emerged from the aftermath of Qin's fall, restoring stability and establishing a lasting imperial structure. The Han rulers moderated the harshness of Qin rule by adopting Confucianism as the official ideology, which emphasized moral governance, social harmony, and clearly defined hierarchical relationships. The bureaucracy expanded during this period, with government officials increasingly selected based on merit and knowledge, contributing to more efficient administration. Under Emperor Wu, who reigned from 141 to 87 year BCE, the empire extended its boundaries and opened trade routes collectively known as the Silk Road, linking China with Central Asia, and facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures. The Han period also saw important technological innovations, including the invention of paper, advancements in iron casting, and progress in astronomy and medicine. However, the Han Dynasty faced internal difficulties such as corruption, the growing power of landholding elites, and widespread social unrest. The Yellow Turban Rebellion, which began in 184 CE, reflected widespread dissatisfaction and further weakened central authority. These challenges culminated in the fall of the Han Dynasty in 220 CE, ushering in a period of political fragmentation. The narrative arc from the Xia to the Han dynasties captures a profound transformation in early Chinese society. It begins with efforts to manage the environment and organize agricultural communities. It progresses through the establishment of writing systems, ritual and religious practices, social hierarchies, and political philosophies. It culminates in the formation of a centralized imperial state supported by a complex bureaucracy and connected to distant regions through trade. The legacies of these dynasties, technological, administrative, and intellectual, form the bedrock of Chinese civilization and influenced political and cultural patterns for millennia to come. This historical overview sets the foundation for detailed examination of each dynasty's unique contributions and challenges, providing a framework for understanding the development of ancient China and its enduring influence. A regional power in the Wei River Valley near present-day Xi'an led a coalition of allied states to defeat the Shang forces in a decisive battle. This conquest marked the beginning of the Western Zhou period. During the Western Zhou, the Zhou kings established their capital near present-day Xi'an and constructed a political order characterized by a feudal system. This system involved granting land and authority to regional lords, often members of the royal family or trusted allies. These lords, referred to as zhuhou, governed their territories semi-autonomously but remained obligated to support the Zhou monarch with military aid and tribute. This feudal network served as a means to extend Zhou control over a vast and diverse territory, encompassing a range of ethnic groups and cultures. The feudal lords administered local governance, military defense, and economic production. While the Zhou king retained supreme authority in theory, the system depended on the loyalty and cooperation of these regional powers to maintain stability. Central to the Zhou claim to rule was the doctrine known as the Mandate of Heaven. This principle asserted that the right to govern was granted by heaven to rulers who governed justly and effectively. Should a ruler fail in these responsibilities, heaven would withdraw its mandate, permitting rebellion and replacement. This doctrine served to justify the Zhou overthrow of the Shang Dynasty and established a moral foundation for rulership, linking political legitimacy to ethical conduct. The Mandate of Heaven introduced an important innovation in Chinese political thought: the accountability of rulers to a cosmic and moral order rather than to lineage alone. It implied that rulership was contingent and conditional, subject to the ruler's performance and virtue. Archaeological findings from the Western Zhou period include bronze ritual vessels, weapons, and inscriptions. These artifacts demonstrate a continuation of Shang bronze craftsmanship with evolving Zhou artistic styles and inscriptions in early Chinese script. Ritual bronze vessels played a significant role in state ceremonies, especially those involving ancestor worship, which reinforced the social hierarchy and political authority. The Zhou kings maintained elaborate rituals designed to communicate with ancestors and deities, positioning themselves as intermediaries between heaven and earth. These religious practices were integral to consolidating political power and reinforcing the hierarchical social order. Economically, the Western Zhou society was primarily agrarian. Farming communities cultivated staple crops such as millet and wheat. Supported by irrigation and agricultural tools, animal husbandry supplemented subsistence. The feudal lords controlled local resources and organized labor for both agricultural production and craft manufacturing. Trade and exchange networks facilitated the movement of goods including bronze items, jade, ceramics, and textiles across the Zhou realm. Marketplaces and fairs emerged as centers of commercial activity and cultural interaction. The stability of the Western Zhou gradually declined in the late 8th century year BC. In 771 year BC, the capital was attacked and sacked by a coalition of nomadic invaders from the northwest and rebellious vassal states. The Zhou king was killed, and the court fled eastward to Luoyi, near modern Luoyang, marking the beginning of the Eastern Zhou period. The Eastern Zhou dynasty spanned from 770 to 256 year BC and is characterized by political fragmentation and ongoing conflict. The central authority of the Zhou monarch weakened substantially, as regional lords asserted greater independence, leading to a decentralization of power. The Eastern Zhou is further divided into the spring and autumn period 770 to 476 year BC and the Warring States period 475 to 21 year BC. Both periods experienced frequent warfare, shifting alliances, and territorial competition among numerous states. Despite this political instability, the Eastern Zhou was a time of remarkable intellectual and cultural development. The fragmentation of power and social change provided the conditions for vigorous philosophical inquiry and debate, known collectively as the 100 Schools of Thought. Confucianism, founded by Confucius Kongzi, emerged as a dominant school. Confucius emphasized ethics, social roles, filial piety, and ritual propriety. His teachings advocated for rulers to govern through virtue and moral example rather than coercion. Education and self-cultivation were central to his philosophy. Taoism, attributed to Laozi and further developed by Zhuangzi, presented an alternative perspective emphasizing harmony with nature, spontaneity, and non-intervention. Taoism challenged rigid social conventions and promoted a return to simplicity and balance with the Tao, or the fundamental principle underlying the universe. Legalism developed as a pragmatic and rigorous approach to governance, emphasizing strict laws, centralized control, and harsh punishments to maintain order. Thinkers like Han Dynasty codified legalist principles, which later informed the Qin Dynasty's policies. Additional philosophical schools such as Mohism advocated universal love and meritocracy, while the school of Yinyong integrated cosmological concepts with governance and natural phenomena. Amid ongoing conflict during the Eastern Zhou, states expanded their armies and adopted advanced military technologies. The use of iron weapons, crossbows, and improved cavalry tactics increased warfare's scale and intensity. Siege warfare and fortified cities became widespread features of the political landscape. 7 major states Ji, Chu, Yan, Han, Zhao, Wei, and Qin dominated the political arena during the Warring States period. Each pursued administrative reforms, economic development, and military strengthening to outcompete rivals. Interstate diplomacy was complex, involving shifting alliances, espionage, and strategic marriages. Despite continuous warfare, cultural and economic exchanges persisted, contributing to the diffusion of ideas and technologies. Agricultural innovations improved food production, supporting population growth and urbanization. Craft specialization and trade networks facilitated economic complexity. The Eastern Zhou period as intellectual and political dynamics directly influenced the unification of China under the Qin Dynasty and 221 year BC. The Qin state's adoption of legalist reforms and centralized bureaucracy enabled its eventual dominance. The Zhou Dynasty's legacy is foundational in Chinese history. The mandate of heaven established a durable political theory of legitimate rule conditional on moral governance. The philosophical schools of the period shaped ethical, political, and social thought for millennia. The Zhou's feudal structure, though eventually replaced by imperial centralization, laid early patterns of territorial administration. Ritual practices and bronze artistry continued Zhou cultural traditions, and the Zhou dynasty encompasses a transformative era marked by political experimentation, intellectual innovation, and cultural consolidation, with lasting influence on Chinese civilization's subsequent development. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Have you ever wondered when China's written history actually began? We often hear about 5,000 years of civilization, but the tangible, written proof starts somewhere truly fascinating, with a dynasty shrouded in bronze, oracle bones, and epic legends. Today, we're diving deep into the Shang Dynasty, the period that truly marks the dawn of recorded history in China. Before the Shang, we have the legendary Xia Dynasty. But the Xia exist mostly in ancient texts, with archaeological evidence still being debated. The Shang, however, are a different story. They left behind something undeniable, something we can read today, writing. This is where history, as we know it, kicks into gear. So buckle up as we travel back more than 3,000 years to uncover the secrets of this foundational civilization. So, how did we even find the Shang? The story is incredible. It starts in the late 1800s with a scholar named Wang Yirong. He was sick and was prescribed a traditional medicine called dragon bones, which were basically just old animal bones and turtle shells. But Wang, being a scholar of ancient scripts, noticed something amazing. There were strange carvings on these bones. They looked like some form of ancient writing. This accidental discovery set off a massive treasure hunt. Archaeologists traced the source of these dragon bones to a place near Anyang in Henan province. There, they unearthed the ruins of a massive ancient city, which turned out to be Yin, the last and greatest capital of the Shang Dynasty. They found royal tombs, magnificent bronze vessels, and most importantly, tens of thousands of these inscribed oracle bones. It was the confirmation everyone was looking for. The Shang Dynasty wasn't just a legend, it was real, and it had a voice. So what exactly are these oracle bones? Imagine you're the Shang king, and you have a big decision to make. Should you go to war? Will the harvest be good? Is the queen's toothache a bad omen? You wouldn't just guess. You'd consult your ancestors through a ritual. A diviner would carve your question onto a turtle plastron or an ox scapula. Then, they'd apply a hot poker to the bone, causing it to crack. The king or the diviner would then interpret these cracks to get an answer from the spirit world. The question and sometimes the outcome were then inscribed on the bone itself. These inscriptions are the earliest form of Chinese writing we have, known as oracle bone script. It's a direct ancestor of the modern Chinese characters we see today. Reading these bones is like opening a direct line to the Shang court. We learn about their military campaigns, their agricultural concerns, their religious beliefs, and even the daily anxieties of the royal family. It's a priceless historical snapshot. But the Shang weren't just about writing. They were masters of a different art form, bronze casting. If you've ever been to a museum with a Chinese art collection, you've probably been awestruck by these intricate, heavy, greenish-blue vessels. The Shang perfected a piece mold casting technique that was incredibly advanced for its time. They created ritual vessels, weapons, and chariot fittings of unparalleled beauty and complexity. These weren't just pots and pans. Bronze was a symbol of power and wealth, reserved for the king and the nobility. These vessels, often decorated with a mysterious animal-like motif called the taoti, were used in elaborate ceremonies to offer food and wine to ancestors. The more bronze you had, and the more elaborate it was, the more important you were. When a king or a noble died, these precious bronzes were buried with them, to ensure they could continue their rituals in the afterlife. The sheer amount of bronze found in Shang tombs speaks to a society with incredible organization, resource control, and artistic genius. So what was Shang society like? It was a highly stratified, agricultural society ruled by a king who acted as both a political and religious leader. He was the son of heaven, the intermediary between the human world and the world of the gods and ancestors. Below the king were the nobles, who were often his relatives. They governed territories, led armies, and participated in state rituals. Then came the artisans who made the amazing bronzes, the farmers who worked the fields, and at the very bottom, prisoners of war who were often used as laborers or grimly, as subjects for human sacrifice. Yes, human sacrifice was a significant part of Shang ritual life. Excavations at Yin have revealed thousands of sacrificial pits containing human skeletons, often buried alongside the main tomb of a king. These victims were seen as attendants or guards for the deceased in the afterlife. It's a stark reminder that while the Shang achieved incredible cultural heights, their world was, by our standards, a brutal one, governed by beliefs that demanded the ultimate price from many. The Shang Dynasty ruled over the Yellow River Valley for about 500 years. Their influence was immense, setting the cultural and political groundwork for everything that followed. Their writing system evolved, their bronze-making techniques were passed down, and their concept of a dynastic mandate, the idea that a ruler's power comes from a divine authority, became a cornerstone of Chinese political thought for millennia. But like all dynasties, the Shang eventually fell. According to traditional accounts, the last Shang king, King Zhou, was a cruel and corrupt tyrant who lost the favor of heaven. He was overthrown by King Wu of the Zhou, a former vassal state to the west. The Zhou Dynasty would take over, inheriting and building upon the Shang legacy. But the story of the Shang, preserved in bone and bronze, was never truly lost. From the accidental discovery of oracle bones in a pharmacy to the unearthing of a magnificent capital city, the story of the Shang Dynasty is a testament to the power of archaeology and the enduring legacy of an ancient culture. They gave China its written language, its mastery of bronze, and many of the core ideas that would shape its future. They are the first chapter in China's long, documented history, a chapter written not on paper, but on the bones of turtles and the gleaming surface of bronze. It's truly incredible to think about how these artifacts, buried for over 3 millennia, have allowed us to hear the voices of the Shang kings and understand their world. It's a direct connection to the very roots of Chinese civilization. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey back in time. What part of the Shang Dynasty fascinates you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives into history. See you in the next one. The Zhou Dynasty stands as one of the most consequential eras in ancient Chinese history. Lasting from approximately 1046 to 256 year BC, it spans nearly 8 centuries and is divided into 2 distinct periods known as the Western Zhou and the Eastern Zhou. The Zhou era not only witnessed significant political and territorial changes, but also introduced enduring ideological frameworks and philosophical developments that shaped the trajectory of Chinese civilization. The dynasty's inception followed the overthrow of the Shang Dynasty around 1046 BC. The Zhou people, originally a regional power in the Wei River Valley near present-day Xi'an, led a coalition of allied states to defeat the Shang forces in a decisive battle. This conquest marked the beginning of the Western Zhou period. During the Western Zhou, the Zhou kings established their capital near present-day Xi'an and constructed a political order characterized by a feudal system. This system involved granting land and authority to regional lords, often members of the royal family or trusted allies. These lords, referred to as zhuhou, governed their territories semi-autonomously but remained obligated to support the Zhou monarch with military aid and tribute. This feudal network served as a means to extend Zhou control over a vast and diverse territory, encompassing a range of ethnic groups and cultures. The feudal lords administered local governance, military defense, and economic production. While the Zhou king retained supreme authority in theory, the system depended on the loyalty and cooperation of these regional powers to maintain stability. Central to the Zhou claim to rule was the doctrine known as the Mandate of Heaven. This principle asserted that the right to govern was granted by heaven to rulers who governed justly and effectively. Should a ruler fail in these responsibilities, heaven would withdraw its mandate, permitting rebellion and replacement. This doctrine served to justify the Zhou overthrow of the Shang Dynasty and established a moral foundation for rulership, linking political legitimacy to ethical conduct. The Mandate of Heaven introduced an important innovation in Chinese political thought: the accountability of rulers to a cosmic and moral order rather than to lineage alone. It implied that rulership was contingent and conditional, subject to the ruler's performance and virtue. Archaeological findings from the Western Zhou period include bronze ritual vessels, weapons, and inscriptions. These artifacts demonstrate a continuation of Shang bronze craftsmanship with evolving Zhou artistic styles and inscriptions in early Chinese script. Ritual bronze vessels played a significant role in state ceremonies, especially those involving ancestor worship, which reinforced the social hierarchy and political authority. The Zhou kings maintained elaborate rituals designed to communicate with ancestors and deities, positioning themselves as intermediaries between heaven and earth. These religious practices were integral to consolidating political power and reinforcing the hierarchical social order. Economically, the Western Zhou society was primarily agrarian. Farming communities cultivated staple crops such as millet and wheat. Supported by irrigation and agricultural tools, animal husbandry supplemented subsistence. The feudal lords controlled local resources and organized labor for both agricultural production and craft manufacturing. Trade and exchange networks facilitated the movement of goods including bronze items, jade, ceramics, and textiles across the Zhou realm. Marketplaces and fairs emerged as centers of commercial activity and cultural interaction. The stability of the Western Zhou gradually declined in the late 8th century BC. In 771 BC, the capital was attacked and sacked by a coalition of nomadic invaders from the northwest and rebellious vassal states. The Zhou king was killed, and the court fled eastward to Luoyi, near modern Luoyang, marking the beginning of the Eastern Zhou period. The Eastern Zhou dynasty spanned from 770 to 256 BC and is characterized by political fragmentation and ongoing conflict. The central authority of the Zhou monarch weakened substantially, as regional lords asserted greater independence, leading to a decentralization of power. The Eastern Zhou is further divided into the spring and autumn period 770 to 476 year BC and the Warring States period 475 to 21 year BC. Both periods experienced frequent warfare, shifting alliances, and territorial competition among numerous states. Despite this political instability, the Eastern Zhou was a time of remarkable intellectual and cultural development. The fragmentation of power and social change provided the conditions for vigorous philosophical inquiry and debate, known collectively as the 100 Schools of Thought. Confucianism, founded by Confucius Kongzi, emerged as a dominant school. Confucius emphasized ethics, social roles, filial piety, and ritual propriety. His teachings advocated for rulers to govern through virtue and moral example rather than coercion. Education and self-cultivation were central to his philosophy. Taoism, attributed to Laozi and further developed by Zhuangzi, presented an alternative perspective emphasizing harmony with nature, spontaneity, and non-intervention. Taoism challenged rigid social conventions and promoted a return to simplicity and balance with the Tao, or the fundamental principle underlying the universe. Legalism developed as a pragmatic and rigorous approach to governance, emphasizing strict laws, centralized control, and harsh punishments to maintain order. Thinkers like Han Dynasty codified legalist principles, which later informed the Qin Dynasty's policies. Additional philosophical schools such as Mohism advocated universal love and meritocracy, while the school of Yinyong integrated cosmological concepts with governance and natural phenomena. Amid ongoing conflict during the Eastern Zhou, states expanded their armies and adopted advanced military technologies. The use of iron weapons, crossbows, and improved cavalry tactics increased warfare's scale and intensity. Siege warfare and fortified cities became widespread features of the political landscape. 7 major states Ji, Chu, Yan, Han, Zhao, Wei, and Qin dominated the political arena during the Warring States period. Each pursued administrative reforms, economic development, and military strengthening to outcompete rivals. Interstate diplomacy was complex, involving shifting alliances, espionage, and strategic marriages. Despite continuous warfare, cultural and economic exchanges persisted, contributing to the diffusion of ideas and technologies. Agricultural innovations improved food production, supporting population growth and urbanization. Craft specialization and trade networks facilitated economic complexity. The Eastern Zhou period as intellectual and political dynamics directly influenced the unification of China under the Qin Dynasty and 221 year BC. The Qin state's adoption of legalist reforms and centralized bureaucracy enabled its eventual dominance. The Zhou dynasty's legacy is foundational in Chinese history. The mandate of heaven established a durable political theory of legitimate rule conditional on moral governance. The philosophical schools of the period shaped ethical, political, and social thought for millennia. The Zhou's feudal structure, though eventually replaced by imperial centralization, laid early patterns of territorial administration. Ritual practices and bronze artistry continued Zhou cultural traditions, and the Zhou dynasty encompasses a transformative era marked by political experimentation, intellectual innovation, and cultural consolidation, with lasting influence on Chinese civilization's subsequent development. Segment 5. The Qin Dynasty unification and centralized administration 221 year BCE - 206 year BCE. By the late 3rd century year BC, Prolonged warfare among competing states had altered political organization across the eastern Asian mainland. Military reforms, population registration, and agricultural expansion had increased state capacity in several regions. Among these, the state of Qin expanded territorial control through sustained campaigns conducted over multiple decades. In 221 year BC, Qin forces completed the defeat of the remaining independent states. Political authority became centralized under a single ruling court, ending the period of competing kingdoms. Control extended across former regional administrations that had previously operated under distinct legal systems, currencies, and governing traditions. Following unification, the Qin government dismantled hereditary aristocratic domains. Territorial administration was reorganized into commanderies and counties. Officials were appointed directly by the central government and rotated periodically. Civil administration, military command, and judicial authority were assigned to separate offices to prevent consolidation of power at the local level. Legal administration was standardized across all territories. A unified legal code was enforced through appointed magistrates operating under written statutes. Penalties and procedures were applied uniformly, replacing regional legal customs. Legal records were maintained through centralized documentation systems. Economic regulation accompanied administrative restructuring. Weights and measures were standardized to ensure consistency in taxation and trade. Coinage was unified to replace former regional currencies, facilitating transactions across administrative boundaries. Tax collection followed standardized quotas based on registered households and land assessments. Written communication was regulated for official use. Script forms were standardized to ensure administrative clarity across regions with differing local writing practices. Official records, decrees, and legal documents were produced using uniform character forms to support centralized governance. Infrastructure development expanded under state supervision. Road networks were constructed to connect commandery centers with the capital region. These routes supported the movement of officials, military units, and supplies. Construction projects relied on organized labor systems administered through local registers. Defensive measures were consolidated along northern frontiers. Existing fortifications were linked and reinforced through coordinated construction efforts. Military garrisons were positioned to monitor border regions and control movement. These installations functioned as state-managed defensive zones rather than autonomous settlements. State authority extended to the regulation of intellectual activity related to governance. The circulation of texts outside official administrative use was restricted. Government archives, centralized approved records, legal references, and administrative manuals for official consultation. Administrative demands increased as the centralized system expanded. Labor mobilization continued for construction and defense projects. Military deployments were maintained across multiple regions to enforce state authority. Communication across the territory relied on courier networks operating along established road systems. In 210 year BC, the ruling monarch died during a state inspection tour. Court authority became contested during the succession process. Central coordination weakened as administrative and military commands became divided among competing officials, as central enforcement declined. Organized uprisings emerged in several regions. Administrative control deteriorated as commandery systems ceased coordinated operation. Military units fragmented or defected to regional forces. In 206 year BC, Opposing forces entered the capital region, central administration collapsed, and the Qin ruling house was removed from power. The unified commandery system ceased to function as a centralized structure, ending Qin rule over the territory. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Ever wonder what makes a dynasty last? Why do some empires crumble in a generation while others stand for centuries? Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most enduring powers, the Han Dynasty of China. They ruled for over 400 years, and the secret to their success wasn't just about military might, it was about brilliant governance and building on the past. Let us explore how the Han Dynasty consolidated its power and created a system that would shape China for 2,000 years. So picture this, the year is 206 BC. The first unified empire of China, the Qin, has just collapsed after only 15 years. It was a brutal, legalist regime, and its harshness led to its downfall. Enter Liu Bang, a commoner turned rebel leader who would become Emperor Gaozu, the founder of the Han Dynasty. He was a pragmatic leader. He saw what went wrong with the Qin and knew he had to do things differently. He couldn't just erase everything the Qin had built, but he also couldn't repeat their mistakes. This became the great balancing act of the early Han. Gaozu's first move was a stroke of genius. He adopted a policy often described as relaxing the net. He abolished the Qin's most draconian laws, reduced taxes, and let the people breathe. This immediately won him popular support. People were tired of the constant fear and heavy burdens under the Qin. Gaozu understood that a happy populace is a stable populace. He wasn't a soft ruler, but he knew that consent, not just coercion, was the key to long-term power. But how do you govern a territory as vast as China? The Qin had tried to rule everything directly from the center, which stretched their resources thin and alienated local elites. Gaozu tried a hybrid model. He kept direct control over the western part of the empire, the heartland, using the commandery county system inherited from the Qin. But in the east, he granted large, semi-autonomous kingdoms to his key allies and relatives. This was a practical compromise. It rewarded his followers and helped secure the frontiers. However, this system had a built-in flaw. These powerful kings might eventually challenge the emperor's authority. And that's exactly what happened. A few decades later, during the reign of Emperor Jing, the simmering tension exploded into the Rebellion of the Seven States. Several of these powerful kingdoms rose up against the imperial court. The rebellion was ultimately crushed, and this became a pivotal moment. The Han court realized that the semi-independent kingdoms were a threat. So, Emperor Jing and his successor, the legendary Emperor Wu, began a systematic process of stripping the kings of their power. They reduced the size of the kingdoms, took away their right to appoint their own officials, and brought them firmly under central control. This was the final step in true imperial consolidation. The hybrid model was gone. The entire empire was now governed directly by the emperor and his bureaucracy. Now, let's talk about that bureaucracy. This is where the Han's genius for administration really shines. The Qin had a centralized system, but the Han perfected it. They created a vast, sophisticated civil service to run the empire. How did you get a job in this government? It wasn't just about who you knew. The Han established the world's first civil service examination system, albeit in a nascent form. Officials were increasingly selected based on their knowledge of Confucian classics, their skills, and their perceived moral character. This meant that talented individuals from lower, but still landowning, classes had a pathway to power. It created a class of scholar officials who were loyal to the state and the Confucian ideology it promoted, not just to a particular emperor. This professional bureaucracy ensured administrative continuity. Even if an emperor was weak or incompetent, the machinery of the state could keep running. This was a revolutionary idea. Emperor Wu, who ruled for an incredible 54 years, was the great architect of this mature Han state. He was ambitious and energetic. He launched massive military campaigns to expand the empire's borders, pushing into Central Asia, northern Vietnam, and the Korean peninsula. These campaigns were incredibly expensive, which led to another major Han innovation: state monopolies. The government took control of the most profitable industries, salt and iron. This was controversial, with many Confucians arguing that the state shouldn't be involved in commerce. But it gave the government a massive source of revenue, independent of taxing the peasants too heavily. This financial stability was crucial for maintaining the army and the bureaucracy. The Han also understood the power of ideology, while the early Han dabbled in various philosophies. Emperor Wu made a decisive choice. He officially established Confucianism as the state orthodoxy. This didn't mean other philosophies were banned, but Confucian values like filial piety, social harmony, and loyalty to the emperor became the foundation of education and government. By promoting a shared set of beliefs, the Han created a cultural glue that helped hold their diverse empire together. The emperor was positioned as the son of heaven, a benevolent father figure ruling over his vast family, the people. This ideological framework provided a powerful justification for imperial rule that resonated deeply within society. So, let's put it all together. The Han Dynasty's success wasn't a fluke. It was the result of a series of deliberate and intelligent choices. They learned from the Qin's failure, initially adopting a lighter touch to win over the people. They solved the problem of regional power through a calculated consolidation of central authority. They built a professional, merit-based bureaucracy that ensured the state could function effectively. Generation after generation, they secured the state's finances through state monopolies and expanded the empire's influence. And finally, they united the realm under a shared Confucian ideology. This combination of pragmatic flexibility and long-term institutional building is what allowed the Han to endure for centuries. They didn't just conquer, they governed. They created a system so robust that it became the blueprint for almost every subsequent dynasty in Chinese history. In fact, the majority ethnic group in China today still calls themselves the Han people, and the Chinese script is known as Han characters. That's the ultimate testament to their legacy. The Han didn't just build an empire, they forged an identity that has lasted for millennia. Have you ever wondered how China became the civilization it is today? The story begins thousands of years ago, with a series of powerful dynasties that laid the foundation for one of the world's most enduring cultures. From legendary heroes taming great floods to the creation of a massive, unified empire. This is the story of ancient China's birth. Our journey starts around 4,000 years ago with the Xia Dynasty. While shrouded in legend, this is where we first see the hallmarks of Chinese statecraft. Imagine facing the mighty Yellow River, whose unpredictable floods could wipe out entire communities. The Xia are credited with organizing massive projects to control these waters, turning a deadly threat into a source of life for agriculture. This monumental effort established a core principle of Chinese governance: the state's duty to manage nature for the good of its people. Following the Xia, The Shang Dynasty emerges into the clear light of history around 1600 BC. How do we know so much about them? Through a fascinating practice, oracle bones. Priests would carve questions to the gods on turtle shells and animal bones, heat them until they cracked, and then interpret the answers. These inscriptions give us a direct window into their world, revealing a complex society with a king at its center, supported by a network of loyal relatives. The Shang were also masters of bronze, creating intricate ritual vessels and powerful weapons that showcased their technological skill and social hierarchy. Their cities were well planned, with grand palaces and temples, demonstrating a sophisticated level of administrative control. Around 1046 BC, the Shang were overthrown by the Zhou Dynasty. The Zhou ruled for nearly 800 years, the longest dynasty in Chinese history. They justified their rule with a new concept, the mandate of heaven. This idea held that a ruler's right to govern was granted by the gods, but could be lost if the ruler became unjust or incompetent. Early on, the Zhou governed through a system similar to feudalism, granting land to lords in exchange for military service and loyalty. But over time, the king's power weakened, and these lords became rulers of their own powerful states. This led to one of the most chaotic but intellectually fertile periods in history, the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods. China was shattered into a mosaic of competing kingdoms, locked in constant warfare. Yet, amidst this conflict, 100 schools of thought blossomed. This was the age of great philosophers like Confucius, who taught about social harmony and moral leadership, Laozi, the legendary founder of Taoism, who spoke of living in tune with the natural way of the universe, and the legalists who argued for strict laws and absolute state control. These competing ideas would shape Chinese thought for millennia. Out of this chaos, one state rose to conquer all others. Into 21 BCE, the state of Qin, led by a ruthless and ambitious king, unified China for the first time. He declared himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. His dynasty was short-lived, lasting only 15 years, but its impact was monumental. The first emperor was a revolutionary builder and a relentless standardizer. He connected the empire with a vast network of roads, began construction on what would become the Great Wall, and standardized everything from currency and weights to the axle widths of carts. Most importantly, he standardized the written language, ensuring that even with different spoken dialects, educated people across China could communicate through a single script. He replaced the old feudal system with a centralized bureaucracy, dividing the empire into provinces and counties governed by officials he appointed directly. The Qin Dynasty was brutal, but it forged the template for the Chinese Empire. After the Qin's swift collapse, a new dynasty emerged that would define China's golden age, the Han Dynasty, which ruled for over 4 centuries. The Han learned from the Qin's mistakes, blending their centralized efficiency with the wisdom of Confucian philosophy. They refined the bureaucratic system, creating a civil service where officials were increasingly selected based on their knowledge of classic texts, not just their noble birth. This created a stable and effective government that could manage a vast and diverse empire. Under the Han, China saw incredible progress. Agriculture flourished with new iron tools, and state-run monopolies on salt and iron filled the government's treasuries. The Han military expanded the empire's borders, pushing into Central Asia. This expansion secured a network of trade routes that would later become famous as the Silk Road, a conduit for goods, ideas, and cultures that connected China with the Roman Empire and everyone in between. This was also an era of brilliant innovation. The Han are credited with one of the most important inventions in human history: paper. This new, cheaper writing material made knowledge more accessible and helped the bureaucracy run more smoothly. The fall of the Han Dynasty into 20 CE plunged China into a period of division. But the foundations laid by these early dynasties were unshakable. The idea of a unified China, governed by a centralized bureaucracy and guided by a rich philosophical tradition, had been firmly established. Later dynasties, like the Great Tang and Song, would look back to the Han as a model of governance and cultural achievement. The administrative systems, legal codes, and even the infrastructure projects of the Xia, Shang, Zhou, Qin, and Han created a resilient framework that would be adapted and reused for the next 2,000 years. The philosophical debates of the Zhou era continued to influence ethics and politics. The Confucian-based civil service examination system, which had its roots in Han practices, became the backbone of the Chinese government for centuries. The engineering feats, from geoflood control to Han canals, continued to evolve, allowing China to support a massive population and the cultural identity forged through a common written language. Shared history and artistic traditions created a continuity rarely seen elsewhere in the world. So, when we look at the incredible history of China, we can see that its roots run deep. The journey from the legendary flood tamers of the Xia to the globe-spanning trade of the Han Dynasty is more than just a sequence of emperors and battles. It's the story of how a civilization was built, idea by idea, innovation by innovation. These ancient dynasties created the political and cultural DNA that would shape China's destiny and leave a lasting legacy on the entire world. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into ancient China fascinating, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories from history. See you next time.